Okay, let's talk about the year 1066. It's one of those years that just completely flips the script on history. We're talking ambition, betrayal, and some seriously brutal warfare that totally reshaped a nation. So today, we're going to break down one of the most pivotal moments in history. So you've got one throne, three claimants. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, pretty much everything. The year kicks off with a massive crisis. The throne is empty, and you have these three incredibly powerful men circling, and each one is absolutely convinced that the crown of England belongs to him. This is way more than just a political squabble, you know? It's the spark that's about to set the entire kingdom on fire.
All right, so how did we get here? How did this whole mess start? Well, our story really begins in the cold winter of early 1066. It all comes down to one man's death, a death that creates a power vacuum and plunges an entire kingdom into total chaos.
So on January 5th, after a pretty long 23-year reign, King Edward the Confessor dies. And here's the kicker. He has no children, no son, no daughter, no obvious heir to take his place. This is a huge deal. He leaves behind this massive power vacuum, and as we all know, nature and ambitious men abhor a vacuum. Now, you might think the rules for who gets to be king are super clear, right? Like the oldest son gets the crown. But back then, in Anglo-Saxon England, it wasn't that simple. The rules were, let's say, flexible. Sure, you needed some kind of blood claim, a connection to the royal family. But what was way more important, you had to be fast and powerful enough to just grab the throne before anyone else could. It was basically a high-stakes, winner-take-all race. And this dangerous free-for-all brings three major players to the stage. Each of them is a powerhouse. Each has his own army. And, you guessed it, each has his own story for why he should be the one to wear the crown. First up, coming from the frozen north, we have claimant number one, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway. I mean, his name literally translates to hard ruler. This guy was the real deal, one of the most feared Viking warriors of his time. And for him, England was some serious unfinished business. So what was his claim? Well, his logic was all about recent history. See, just a few decades before, England was actually part of this huge Scandinavian empire under a king named Canute the Great. So the way Hardrada saw it, with Edward now gone and no heir, the crown should just go back to its rightful owners, the Norwegians. All right, contender number two. You could call this guy the home field favorite, Harald Godwinson, the Earl of Wessex. He was an Anglo-Saxon nobleman and, at the time, probably the most powerful man in all of England. He had deep roots in the country. Harold's claim really came down to two things, proximity and power. He wasn't just some random guy. He was King Edward's brother-in-law and basically his right-hand man for years. So to all the other English lords, he seemed like the logical, stable choice. He was the one who could protect their interests from, foreign invaders. And that brings us to our third and final contender, coming from just across the English Channel in France. This is the calculating, incredibly ambitious William, Duke of Normandy. Now, William's case, it's a little more complicated. He did have a distant blood tie to King Edward, but his claim really rested on two supposed promises. First, he said that Edward had promised him the throne years ago, but second, and this is the absolute kicker, he insisted that Harald Godwinson himself had sworn a sacred oath to support William's claim to the throne. And this is where you see just how politically cunning William really was. According to the Norman story, he actually tricked Harald into swearing this oath. See, the oath was sworn over a box that supposedly Harald didn't know was filled with holy relics, the bones of a saint. Now, in the Middle Ages, this was everything. Breaking an oath like that was a massive sin. William used this brilliantly. He painted Harald not just as a rival, but as a treacherous, godless oathbreaker. So, the stage is set, the players are in position, and the game begins. Harald Godwinson gets himself crowned king almost immediately, but he's no fool. He knows invasions are coming. He is about to be forced into a desperate, impossible fight for survival on two different fronts at the same time. And the rest of the year is just a whirlwind. King Edward dies in January, right? By September, the invasions begin. Think about that. The entire fate of England is going to be decided in less than a month, in two of the most famous battles in all of British history. The first threat comes from the north. It's Harald Hardrada. He lands with a massive Viking army. So what does King Harald do? In what is just an unbelievable feat of endurance and strategy, he force marches his army 187 miles north in just a few days to surprise them. Just imagine marching that far that fast in medieval gear.
And incredibly, he pulls it off. On September 25th, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harald's army completely surprises and crushes the Vikings. It is a stunning, legendary victory. But just as his exhausted men are celebrating, they get the worst possible news you can imagine. William has landed. His Norman army is on the south coast. The fight is far from over.
Okay, so let's just pause and think about the state of these two armies, because this is absolutely crucial. Harold's Saxons have just fought a massive battle and marched hundreds of miles. Now they have to turn right around and march all the way back south. They are completely exhausted. William's Normans, on the other hand, they're rested, they're better equipped, and they have archers and cavalry, armored knights on horseback. The odds are just overwhelmingly stacked against Harald. The battle, which we now call the Battle of Hastings, just rages for hours. The English dig in on a hilltop, forming this incredible shield wall, and William's army just can't break through. So he pulls out a really clever, really risky tactic, the feigned retreat. Basically, his knights pretend to run away down the hill. This baits some of the English soldiers into breaking their strong shield wall to chase after them. And the second they do, the Norman cavalry wheels around and just cuts them down. After 6 long, brutal hours, the English line finally breaks. King Harald is killed. And yeah, the story that everyone knows, supposedly from an arrow to the eye, comes right from the famous Bios tapestry. With their king dead, the English resistance just collapses. And just like that, William, Duke of Normandy, becomes William the Conqueror, King of England. But believe it or not, the story doesn't actually end on the battlefield. Because this wasn't just about a new guy getting the crown. This was a full-blown revolution that was going to change England forever. One of the biggest and most immediate changes was language. You suddenly had a ruling class, the new Norman lords, who all spoke French. But the common people, the conquered Anglo-Saxons, still spoke English. For hundreds of years, England was basically a country with 2 languages. And you can still see that divide today. Think about it. Words for fancy things like government, law, fine dining, parliament, judge, beef, they all come from Norman French. But the simple, everyday words, house, cow, eat, that's all from Old Anglo-Saxon English. And this collision of languages totally transformed English. It actually made the grammar simpler in a lot of ways. For example, Old English had a lot of what we call strong verbs, like sing, sang. Under Norman influence, a lot of those became weak verbs, where you just slap an ed on the end, like add becomes added. The English that you and I are speaking right now is a direct result of this massive linguistic mashup. And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. The entire course of the English language, and you could even argue world history, really turned on the events of that one single bloody day. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if Harald Godwinson had won at Hastings? What if that one arrow had missed its mark? What would our language, our culture, what would our world look like today?